Hello, everybody. This is Anna Cheetah, not Tim this time. I guess I've been given the opportunity. I kind of invited myself, and he didn't argue with me, to host an episode of Theology Taco Podcast. Now, this is so out of my comfort zone, but I'm excited about what I have to share, and I hope that in sharing this, and me being obedient in something that makes me a little bit uncomfortable, that it'll speak to those of you that are listening. Those that know me know I would much prefer to be singing in front of a bunch of people right now than speaking, so bear with me. I'm going to reference my notes, but try not to read straight from them, because if I do, I will bore you all to complete and utter tears. But today I want to talk to you guys about isolation, and I know that's kind of a worn out, overused subject and term right now, and for that I apologize. I know everybody's tired of hearing about isolation, quarantine, social distancing. That whole deal is very right now. So for that I do apologize, but I will say that I want to discuss it less in the term of here and now and more so on a larger scale, and really some of the dangers of isolation, both physically, spiritually, emotionally, as well as just the value in community and the power that we have when we do live in community. A lot of it, it goes far beyond just being physically by yourself. So to start this out, I want to just try to give you a little bit of an illustration or put a picture in your mind. So let's imagine that there is a military commander who is preparing for a battle. This commander knows that the enemy he's facing has at least 600 armed men who have deadly weapons. Now, let's just say that this commander decides, I'm going to send one soldier, out unarmed, unprotected. It's a no-brainer that this would be the dumbest military strategy ever. That poor soldier would be annihilated. He would likely not return alive. So most of us would argue that, of course, the military commander, in turn, should train up several soldiers or several men for battle. They should go in equipped and armed. This is, again, a no-brainer. This isn't something that seems like some crazy, intense military high-tech strategy. It's just sensible, sound logic. You would never enter a battle with the intent of victory, unarmed and unprotected. So with that being the case, and with us all, arguably agreeing to that, why is it, or my question to you is, why is it that so often when we're facing spiritual battles or any kind of emotional turmoil, do we choose to fight alone? God never intended for it to be that way. We were never meant to fight battles by ourselves. There is such a powerful quote that the author Lisa TerKeurst makes in her book entitled It's Not Supposed to Be This Way. And to somewhat summarize the book without giving it away or going into too much detail, she's basically talking a lot about what you are to do when life doesn't go the way you want it to. How you still see God's glory and his power in these situations. And one of the big things she talks about is the power and the danger in isolation. In her book, she makes the statement, if the enemy can isolate you, he can influence you. This has stuck with me. This is something that a lot of the women in my small group have talked about over and over and over and over again. The power of influence that the enemy has when you become isolated. But why is that? Why is it that he has so much power? And really the reality behind that is because if you are living in community, you can have words of wisdom, words of encouragement, the power of prayer really surrounding you. But the enemy wants nothing more than to convince you that what you're dealing with, you can either handle by yourself or is too big for other people. It's too complicated. It's too tricky. It's embarrassing. It's shameful. He wants to convince you that it's really not anybody else's problem and that you can just handle it. And the reason behind that is because if he can get you alone, then he has the power to creep in with depression, with anxiety, with shame, with guilt, and with all of these things that are ultimately opening up a whole nother door or a whole nother battleground for him to attack with. Isolation can be deadly. We even see this throughout the Bible. We watch a lot of Christ's ministry in the New Testament, or all of his ministry in the New Testament. And throughout the majority of it, he's in community with other people. We see him, eating with the disciples, walking with disciples, sitting amongst 5,000, 10,000, just people all the time. Really, the only time we ever see Christ retreat and find a place of solitude is when he's going to speak with the Father. And again, arguably there, he's not really in solitude at that point either, as he is in communication with the Heavenly Father. I would argue that Christ's hardest moments on earth were when he was in true isolation. To me, this happened just moments before his earthly death on the cross, when he became absolutely isolated and cut off from the Father in heaven, and when all men had abandoned him. This again shows isolation can lead to death. Christ was alone, 100% alone. And that is much what we do, that's often what we do when we're facing a battle that just seems insurmountable. So we see this idea of community really play out in the Bible, and we see the power that God talks about, or not God, well, I guess it is God, but that the apostles and all the authors throughout the Old and New Testament talk about the power in numbers and the ability to fight stronger and harder and really just be there for each other. And before I go any further, I want to make sure that I note that this isn't just, or community is not just for times of warfare. Though it's so vital to have a community when you're in times of battle and in times of trial and frustration, it is also so sweet to have community when you're celebrating, when you're excited about something, when you're getting ready to welcome a new baby, or when you're getting married, or when you just got a promotion at your job. It's so incredible to have a community that is around you, that is going to rally with you and be excited with you. I remember my husband and I attended a church several years ago, and the pastor was doing a series, I believe, on the importance of community. But he gave an illustration one Sunday that has stuck with me for years, that I want to kind of share with you guys. I don't remember his exact wordings, but I feel like I can share the image as vividly as possible, to where you guys will really get it and understand it. So he came out, normal service, everything appeared simple, but with him, he carried a small lantern that he set up on the podium as he was preparing to speak. He went on to talk a lot about, how there's value in the people that you surround yourself with, that, they're really going to be kind of your guardrails, your guiding posts, and all those kinds of things. When life gets a little crazy, or when you might start to veer off, they'll really hold you accountable. And again, they'll be there to celebrate with you when things are exciting and happy. And really just the importance of doing life with people. So as he was talking, it was all fine. And then in a moment, the entire room went pitch black. They shut off the lights. And as the pastor continued to talk, he just turned on his little lantern, just a small dim light that was just illuminating a very small portion of the room, enough for him to see. He kept talking and was talking about how this light represented him in his spiritual walk. As he talked, he went on to say that sometimes life gets the better of us. Sometimes we get a little discouraged. Sometimes we do become frustrated and we start to lose sight of God, or we may start to falter a little bit or go a little bit off the rails. And in that moment, he shut his lantern off and the room was completely pitch black. He then proceeded to ask the congregation, he said, "Now, if I were to try to find my light to turn it back on, it may be as simple as me reaching over and finding it quickly." He said, "Or I could fumble around, I could trip, I could fall, I could hurt somebody else in the process of trying to reignite my lamp." The pastor then turned his lamp back on while the rest of the room remained black, and he continued to talk. And in a few moments, he shut his lamp off again. And he said, "Okay, let me present another situation. Let's say I, again, fumble, fall, really lose sight of what I'm doing here. What happens if my lamp goes off again? But this time, when his lamp shut off, about 30 lanterns behind him had lit up. While he was talking, his life group, the people that he did life with every day, had come up on the stage and had held their own lanterns. And as his light went off, theirs came on. He then waited a moment and looked at the congregation and made the statement along the lines of, even if my light is off, the community around me has the power to guide me back home. He said, instead of me fumbling around in the darkness, instead of me tripping and falling and not knowing which direction to go, I can look towards the light of others to ultimately guide me home. I have seen this principle play out time and time and time again. I'm very honored to hold one of the positions that I do within our church, where I help lead a women's group on a weekly basis. And though some of the stories that come through there are absolutely like mind-numbing and heartbreaking, some of the things that these ladies walk through, that I have walked through, could destroy you. Like, they could really just wreck you if you face them alone. The power that I've seen in just having even one other person sit next to you and talk you through it, and to listen, to cry with you, to pray with you, to really just say, you know what, that's not okay, but we've got a God that's bigger, and we've got a God that knows the end of the story. And for right now, we're just going to do the next thing. We're going to do the next right thing, and we're going to keep pushing forward, and we're going to trust that God has this story in his hands, and that the enemy is not going to have the victory in the end. Because, again, if he can isolate you, he can influence you, and the enemy wants nothing more than to tell you that your story is going to be all for nothing, and that all these trials you have are just going to continue and continue and continue and continue, and you're never going to find victory. But we know, as Christians, and what we often have to tell ourselves in our group, is that this is not the end of the story. Our pastor always says, if you're not winning, the story's not over. If you haven't won, the story isn't finished. Because the reality is, we do win in the end. If you're following Christ, if you're continuing down that path, you will have victory. Your trials will not be for anything. But if the enemy gets the power to isolate and to get inside of your head and tell you that you won't have victory, you're going to start to believe it. So surround yourself with those that are like-minded and that will ultimately help push you that direction. Again, I know that so many of us right now are physically isolated. I know that a lot of us are stuck at home. If you're like me, you're with 4 kids most of the day, and Tim's here too, which is great. But you kind of get a little antsy and want to have other adult conversation, or you want to communicate with people that you're used to communicating with, and it's become a very tricky, a very scary, and a very uncertain time. Many of us don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know what this ultimately looks like, or really where our lives are going to be in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks. And what I saw initially with a lot of this, and I still see some of today, is fear. I see a lot of anxiety. I see a lot of uncertainty, and I see the enemy trying to convince us that this is going to be the doom and gloom, end of times, whatever. We're never going to make it out alive. Our country's going to be destroyed. Our economy's going to go, all these things that can really get people so worked up and take their attention away from God. But as I was preparing this, I thought about really the reality of what I've seen since this has begun, since all of this COVID-19 stuff has begun. I have seen churches upon churches upon churches live streaming their services. Our pastor spoke with us about how our live service was viewed 1,500 times this past week. Y'all, our congregation's only about 500 people, so that's an incredible reach that may not have happened had this not been the case. I've seen families connect deeper, more intentionally. The number of posts I see on social media of kids really getting to go on walks with their parents daily, or parents having the time to really do arts and crafts with their children, or have conversations that they wouldn't have otherwise really had the time to have, because they were always going to sporting events, going to church, going to school, going to work. They're really getting the time to just invest. I have seen communities, ours in particular has been phenomenal, come together and help those around them, to just pull from their own resources to help others. So don't let the enemy trick you into thinking that this is all for bad, because the reality is, what I believe he intended to break us is ultimately going to build us up even stronger, and we're going to come out of this all for the better. So as I prepare to close here, and I want to kind of look back at my notes, make sure that I didn't ultimately miss anything here, is just to remind you guys that as we continue to move forward, like I said, we don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know what it's going to look like. Just be very mindful and be very intentional about not allowing yourself to become more than just physically isolated. Don't allow yourself to become mentally isolated, emotionally isolated, spiritually isolated, because that will ultimately be your undoing. Reach out to those that care for you. And if you don't have anybody to reach out to us. We're happy to talk to you. We're praying for each of you, and we definitely appreciate your prayers in return. And with that being said, y'all, I'm confident I didn't hit everything I probably wanted to discuss in this. I tried not to look at my notes. I'm hoping that all in all this does speak to somebody, and that we can really find the joy in these times, and that we can really continue to push forward. Thank you.